Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Secretary General and most ministers will give an introduction. Afterwards, there's the possibility for a few questions and maybe later on some one-on-ones. I will give the word to the Foreign Minister first.
Thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives Defence Minister Kajsa and myself a great pleasure to welcome our friend and colleague, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, here today in The Hague. And Jens, thank you very much for a truly excellent meeting, and thank you also for the tremendous leadership you have shown in the last year, and of course all the years, but particularly in this hour of maximum danger. You've been doing a fantastic job, and we cherish the warm partnership and friendship with you. Ladies and gentlemen, NATO remains pivotal to our collective security. And right now, that security, as we all see, is under pressure as a result of Russia's ruthless aggression against Ukraine. The alliance has played an exemplary role in providing support to Ukraine and maintaining unity in doing so, which is, of course, of the utmost importance. And as the Netherlands, we will continue to support with weapons, with sanctions, with humanitarian aid, with accountability. And we've done more than between €500 million and €1 billion and are continuing to support because we do want to stress that Kiev is not alone. And I'm glad to announce that the Netherlands will contribute an additional €20 million for NATO's trust fund for Ukraine. And in total, we contribute 25 million to support Ukraine armed forces with combat food rations, first aid kits, ambulances, fuel trucks, and drone jammers. And I'm sure the Minister of Defense will elucidate on this as well. The Netherlands, NATO allies, the EU, we will continue to stand with Ukraine. And in that, we are one. And that unity is stronger than ever before. And soon, we will be with 32 allies. And let me say once again, it is high time to welcome our friends from Finland and Sweden as full NATO members, because their access will further strengthen our alliance and the safety and security across the globe. And to that end, I very much look forward to continuing the discussions at the Foreign Ministers meeting in Bucharest in 2 weeks' time. Yes. With delivering it requires investment from all of us. Together we are strong, and together we can make NATO even stronger. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Wopke. But first of all, let me say tack. Tack Jens. Du har visst ledarskap och du har klart att upprätthålla enhet i NATO i vanskliga tider. Tack. So that was my not so perfect Norwegian.
No, it's perfect.
I think we're all seeing now with the liberation of Kherson that the Ukrainian strategy is working and that the Russian strategy has led to failure. I think it's a moral boost for the very brave and fierce Ukrainian. It shows also that our military support is working, that Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield, and that's very important. But we also know that winter is coming, and we've seen heavily damaged infrastructure in Ukraine. So we must stay the course. It's crucial. It's crucial that we stop Putin, that Putin stops this illegal and senseless war. If Russia stops fighting tomorrow, there is no war anymore. And if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no more Ukraine. That's the situation. That's why we will continue our support, as my colleague of Foreign Affairs just stated, with weapons and capabilities Ukraine needs, but also with training. We are in the Interflex training with more than 100 Dutch soldiers. And when I visited it recently, I heard the stories of the recruits who've gone back, who've actually been fighting at the front, that the training makes a difference between life and death. Hoekstra also mentioned accountability. Dutch team is currently investigating war crimes in Ukraine. Of course, we also discussed NATO, the importance of a stronger NATO. NATO is here to protect our people, to stand up also for the values that we believe in NATO. And we talked about how to strengthen the alliance deterrence and defense on the longer term by increasing readiness, by adapting our force structure and making sure also we replenish our stocks in time. And a strong NATO means also that we have to maintain our technological edge, which is very important. I think we have that advantage and we have to keep that up. And my ministry will provide military testing centers for Diana, a very important innovation initiative that NATO took. And in the end, it's our task to make sure that our armed forces can win the conflicts of today, but most importantly, also the conflicts of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
Minister Hoekstra, dear Wopke, Minister Ollongren, dear Kajsa, it's great to be here, great to meet you both again, and thank you for your warm welcome, and also thank you to both of you for your strong leadership in critical times for our alliance. The Netherlands is a valued and important NATO ally, making strong contributions to our shared security. In the air, Dutch jets protect NATO's eastern flank. On land, Dutch troops serve in NATO's battle groups in Lithuania and in Romania. And at sea, you are leading one of NATO's maritime groups. I also welcome your ambitious plans to increase defense spending in the coming years and to keeping our technological edge in a more competitive world. All these contributions are important as we face a critical moment for European security. In our meeting, we just discussed Russia's brutal war of aggression and our support for Ukraine. Russia's withdrawal from Kherson demonstrates the incredible courage of the Ukrainian armed forces. But it also shows the importance of our continued support to Ukraine. We should not make the mistake of underestimating Russia. The Russian armed forces retain significant capabilities, as well as a large number of troops. And Russia has demonstrated the willingness to bear significant losses. They have also shown extreme brutality. We have all seen the horrific scenes from the liberated territories, as well as the indiscriminate attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure. The coming months will be difficult. Putin's aim is to leave Ukraine cold and dark this winter, so we must stay the course. I thank the Netherlands for your generous contributions to NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine. This will fund urgent support such as fuel, winter clothing, medical supplies, and counter-drone systems. I also welcome that the Netherlands will provide another 120 million euros of assistance to Ukraine, including for upgraded Czech battle tanks. The current conflict also shows the importance of diversifying our energy supplies and protecting our critical infrastructure. The Netherlands plays an important role in contributing to the resilience of other allies through its ports, transport networks, and energy import facilities. Today in our meeting, we also addressed our preparations for the meeting of the NATO foreign ministers in Bucharest. This will be an important opportunity to review our support for Ukraine, as well as other partners facing Russian aggression and pressure, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia and Moldova. I wish to take this opportunity to recognize the victims of the bomb blast in Istanbul yesterday. My condolences go to all those affected and to the Turkish people. So, Ministers, thank you once again for hosting me. It's always a great pleasure to meet with you and to discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens.
Thank you, Secretary General. Now there's room for some questions. Please give your name, the medium you work for, and who do you refer to for answering the question.
Secretary General Stoltenberg. Anthony Deutsch, Reuters. There's been some suggestions that now might be a good time for Ukraine to enter into talks with Russia. Winter is coming. They've had some successes on the battlefield. Do you agree that this might be a good time to that? And if I have one for Mr. Hoekstra. You've said in the past that you thought it might be a good idea to have a tribunal for aggression. All three of you mentioned the brutal aggression of Russia in this conflict. Do you think it would be a good idea to have a special tribunal for specifically aggression in the Netherlands? And if so, how are you trying to create that? Thank you.
I think we have to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression where Russia, President Putin, has invaded another country. By doing that, they have violated international law. And even though they have lost some territory over the last weeks and months, they still control large parts of Ukraine. Ukraine has stated that they're ready to negotiate, but we also, of course, know that the only way to achieve an acceptable outcome for them is that they have the strength on the battlefield. Most wars end at some stage around the negotiating table, but what happens around that table is fundamentally linked to the situation on the battlefield. So what we should do is to support Ukraine, to strengthen their hand, so at some stage there can be negotiations where Ukraine prevail as an independent sovereign nation in Europe. It's for Ukraine to decide. It's them to pay. They are paying now the highest price in terms of lost lives and damage to the country. So it's for Ukraine to decide what kind of terms that are acceptable for them. It's for us to support them and maximize the likelihood for an acceptable outcome. And it is, as Minister Ollongren and Kajsa said, that if President Zelensky and Ukrainians stop fighting, then Ukraine will cease to exist as an independent nation. If President Putin and Russia stops fighting, then we'll have peace. So Russia can end this war tomorrow. They started the war, and they can end the war by stop invading a neighbor.
With that, I very much agree. Who is strong at the battlefield is strong at the negotiation table, and that is why making sure we enable Ukraine to hold its own basically trumps all other things that we're doing. But you're very right. There is much more than providing military aid that we need to do. Humanitarian aid, sanctions, but also accountability, because we all see, read, and hear about the most horrific things that are going on. And therefore, we owe it to the victims, we owe it to their families, we owe it to prosperity that we do make sure that justice is done. And justice is being done, even though we know that that is extremely difficult. If you talk to people who have seen similar cases, it takes years and years. You typically are only able to convict a few of the perpetrators, but still you do need to do it. We very much support also this effort with sending teams, as the Minister of Defense just said. We will continue to do so. And we are open and pragmatic in how to make sure that justice is being done. So we're in full support of the ICC. We also see that the crime of aggression should be put to trial as well. So we're open to exploring what further can be done. What we do have to acknowledge, though, is that every single time you set up a new legal vehicle, you do run into quite a set of complicated issues, because that does need to be acknowledged. But our fundamental position is justice needs to be done, and it is secondary how we achieve that.
Now, only to say that looking at the situation in the battlefield, of course, Ukraine is in a much better place than they were when the war started. And that underlines the point that both Jens and Wopke made. If you have a strong position on the battlefield, in the end, that will make you stronger at the negotiating table. And at the same time, it's very difficult to see that now that the whole Russian strategy has failed, what possible purpose is being served by more losses of lives every day on both sides. And at some point, with winter coming, that must lead to the inevitable conclusion that Russia has to stop fighting this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. There's a question here in the front.
Dutch News, NOS. Mr. Stoltenberg, as you said, negotiations aren't an option right now. And given the fact that the war might still continue for quite a long time, are European NATO allies, and perhaps specifically the Netherlands, doing enough at this point if we want to continue to support Ukraine on the long term, as it might be taking? And what more could be done by the Netherlands or European NATO allies?
I think we have to recognize that NATO allies, the Netherlands and others, have provided Ukraine with unprecedented support. President Putin made several big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. One was to underestimate the Ukrainians, the courage, the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, the political leadership, the Ukrainian. Putin made several big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. One was to underestimate the Ukrainians, the courage, the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, the political leadership, people. But the other big mistake he made was to underestimate NATO allies, partners in our commitment to support Ukraine. And we have supported Ukraine now for several months, and there is a clear message from NATO allies that we will continue to provide support to Ukraine. I welcome the new announcements from the Netherlands showing that allies are ready to continue to provide military support, economic support, humanitarian support, and also to continue to impose sanctions on Russia. So President Putin not only underestimated the Ukrainians, but he also underestimated NATO allies, Netherlands and partners. I also would like to commend the European Union for the sanctions, the support, everything they do to help and support the Ukrainians. Based on what we see actually that there is a continued strong also public support across Europe and North America for continue to provide support to Ukraine. That was also, I think, the message from the elections in the United States, the midterm elections, that we have strong bipartisan support in the United States for continue to provide support to Ukraine for as long as it takes. So the message is, yes, we will support, and we will also, of course, constantly assess what types of weapons we are providing to Ukraine.
Thank you, Secretary General. There are two questions, and there is not much time. First question here, Volkskrant. Then you are the last.
Arnoud Brouwers with the Volkskrant. My question is to all of you. One of Mr. Putin's strategies appears to be to create a second wave of refugees fleeing to Europe by bombing all the civilian infrastructure that he can reach in Ukraine. Are you preparing, since support from the West is very important for Ukraine to keep its defenses up, are you preparing here for such an eventuality, is my first question. And second, are you preparing us, the people who live here, for what may be in store this winter, since public support from our countries seems to be one of the pillars on which Ukrainian defense also rests?
Yeah, maybe as
maybe I can start and
Sure,
you
sure.
take over. I think, well, you state that one of the goals is to create more refugees from Ukraine into to the rest of Europe. I think the goal, if there is a goal, is to demoralize the Ukrainians. And I think we can see now that that's not going to succeed, whatever happens. Morale is very high on the Ukrainian side. And I think in general, as we all three stated, that Putin has not achieved any of his goals thus far, is that he's achieving quite the opposite goal. We are seeing Sweden and Finland entering NATO. We are seeing more unity in the NATO and also within the EU than ever before. And actually Ukraine has friends and allies that you almost cannot count, and the friends and allies of Russia you can count on one hand. So yes, there is a sort of a tactic of the scorched earth, if you want, by targeting the critical infrastructure, electricity, water, etc., targeting the Ukrainian people directly. But it's not going to break the morale. I'm sure of that.
No, I very much agree with what the defense minister said, and this might happen. But if there's one thing that we have seen also in the first wave after February 24th, is the tremendous support from governments all across Europe and beyond, by the way, and our citizens to help out and to harbor those basically fleeing from within our region from one place to the next. And that is something I think we should sustain. There is, however, one thing that, of course, we do see. We do see that Putin is weaponizing food, particularly vis-à-vis the global south. He is weaponizing energy also against us. So the one thing we need to do, in my view, as governments in Europe and North America and across the globe, is make sure that on the one hand we will continue to support our war effort. And on the other hand, we do provide our own citizens with a shield to make sure that they can sustain their lives, they can pay the energy bill, they are able to do their shopping, because as long as we maintain their position, I'm sure we can also maintain the broad support that we see all across the streets here in the Netherlands and beyond.
Let me just say that, first of all, I agree with what Kajsa and Wopke just said. I can add one more point, and that is that I'm confident and certain that NATO allies and partners will continue to support Ukraine, not only because we stand in solidarity with Ukraine, but also because it is in our own interest to ensure that President Putin doesn't win in Ukraine. That will be a catastrophe for the Ukrainians. But it will also make the world more dangerous. We will become more vulnerable, because then the lesson learned from the war in Ukraine for President Putin, but also for other authoritarian leaders, is that when they violate international law, when they invade another country, and when they use brutal force, they achieve what they want. And that will make us all more vulnerable. And that's the reason why it's in our interest, our security interest, to provide support to Ukraine. Yes, we pay a price. Higher energy bills, higher inflation, the economic costs of providing support. But the price we'll pay if we don't succeed, if President Putin wins, will be much higher, because then we'll live in a more dangerous world.
Thank you, Secretary General. Last question here on the second row.
Mr. Stoltenberg, Mr. Hoekstra, just to be clear, following up the questions on the war goals of the Ukraine, it's fully clear that Ukraine is completely dependent on Western aid for military success at the moment. So it's a relevant question, I think. What is for the West, for NATO, or for the Dutch government, an acceptable outcome of this war? If you're saying it's okay for Ukraine to reconquer the territories that were lost, does it also include the Krim and also Donbass? Or would you say that is too much, because that will risk destabilizing Russia in a broader sense? Thank you.
It is for Ukraine to decide what is an acceptable resolution of this conflict. We will not sit here and decide that on behalf of them. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And again, we have all made it clear again and again that we support Ukraine's right to self-defense. We have to understand that what Ukraine does is to defend their own country against a war of aggression. And NATO allies, we are not party to the conflict, but we support Ukraine in the right for self-defense. And the right for self-defense is a right enshrined in the UN Charter. And we will not sit in Brussels or in any other NATO capital and decide what is acceptable. What we will do is to maximize the likelihood for Ukrainians to achieve an acceptable resolution around the negotiating table. And the way we do that is to strengthen their hand on the battlefield. That's what we do.
I couldn't agree more. If this whole, at the moment that this whole horrible war is over, one thing needs to be crystal clear to the Kremlin and to all dictators and would-be dictators across the globe. And that is that, you know, there is no room for this type of imperialism in the 21st century. And that is our aim. Our aim is to help the brave Ukrainians that are fighting for their own country, but is also making sure that, you know, our whole continent stays safe. And we do make sure that this lesson, that this notion clearly resonates across the globe. So we will continue to support them. And let's not be naive. This will not be over in my view, in the next few weeks or months. This might well go on for the foreseeable future, and we will continue to sustain them because there is and there will be a lot at stake that is worth helping them for. So we will do so. Maybe Kajsa?
No, I agree completely. And the last thing we heard after the last illegal annexation was that Kherson was put to be Russian forever. And now it's back in Ukrainian hands. So we'll have to see how the war goes, but it's up for Ukraine to decide on when it could accept an end of the war and when not. And as long as it takes, we will be there to support them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for attending.
Thank you.